Alright guys, in today's video we have a lot to go over and talk about in regards to the PlayStation 5 deep dive that happened yesterday. And I'm sure, as a lot of you know, I did a live reaction to it, and the response to it, particularly for me and the way people were reacting to my reaction, was not very good. And it's kind of understandable. In the moment I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and now that I'm removed from that, I want to give my honest evaluation on everything that has went down, and I want to talk about the good and the bad when it comes to everything that we recently learned about. And so I'm hoping that you guys will stick around to watch the entirety of this video, because again, I have a lot to say. I have no idea how long it's going to end up being, but I think it's going to make for some interesting conversation, and a lot of it will be based off of my opinion. So if you care about that, stick around. But before going any further, be sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button as well, as it really helps it out. But yeah, in my opinion, there were definitely some good things, but certainly some bad things that came out of yesterday's PlayStation 5 deep dive. Now, the thing I want to acknowledge here first and foremost is there's a lot of people who want me to take a L, as they put it, for constantly talking about tflops on the channel, constantly talking about rumors and leaks, and more specifically focusing on that 13.3 tflop number, which has turned out to obviously not be correct. So yes, I will take the L. This is me taking the L, and I'm okay with that, because I do understand that it's not fair for me to continually talk about it, and then when the day comes that it all turns out to be untrue, or at least the majority of it, for me to just like pretend it never happened. So I will take the L. However, I still do have a lot of strong opinions about everything that was revealed and what we've learned, and I feel as though that it's way too easy to get caught up in the like console war nonsense and not really understand exactly what is going on here. Now, I don't want to go through every single spec here, because, I mean, we all probably know what they are at this point, and you can find these spec sheets literally everywhere. You can find a bunch of other videos going over every little detail, but I want to focus more specifically on the main components and the huge differences between these two consoles. And that's what I want to do first in this video. I want to talk about these two consoles and why they're so different, and how basically Sony and Microsoft are going for very different approaches here. And there's a lot of people who are immediately jumping on the bandwagon that the PS5 is some kind of paperweight console, that if you're excited for it, or if you're happy with the specifications that Sony announced, then you're just being a fanboy or something like that. But I feel like that's a little bit unfair, because the truth is, both of these consoles, even the most hardcore Xbox fanboys will attest to this, both of these consoles are going to be awesome. However, there will be differences. What those differences will be exactly have yet to be seen. And one of those differences could very well be, and I'm expecting it to be, the price point. Now, I want to highlight the CPU. Both the PS5 and the Xbox Series are using Zen 2 CPUs, and they have 8 cores, and the PlayStation 5's is clocked at 3.5 gigahertz with a variable frequency, to whereas the Xbox Series is locked at 3.8 gigahertz, or it can be locked at 3.6 gigahertz with SMT. Now, this is a huge difference between both of these consoles, as when it comes to the PlayStation 5, Sony is kind of opting for this console that can just kind of fluctuate with frequencies, to whereas everything that Microsoft did, they want it locked in and they want it static. So that's a huge difference right off the bat. And this is where you see just a fundamental difference in design philosophy when it comes to these consoles, where there's no denying that the PS5 is the less powerful console here, because when we look at the GPU, it says here that the PlayStation 5 GPU is 10.28 tflops, 36 compute units at 2.23 gigahertz variable frequency. The Xbox Series has 12 tflops locked, 52 compute units at a locked 1.825 gigahertz. Huge difference there. This is possibly between the GPU and the SSD. This is where the biggest differences are. Now, what Sony's kind of opting for here is less focus on just raw GPU compute power and basically just allowing it to kind of fluctuate in frequency, which ultimately means the tflop number itself will also fluctuate. So to sit here and say that this is a locked 10.2 tflop console is not true. It can actually dip below that to around probably 9.2 tflops based on, what it's running at, hence the variable frequency. And it's very interesting, that Sony is taking this approach, but we know that both of these architectures are on RDNA 2 or custom RDNA 2, and it seems as though that the Xbox Series will have some more fleshed out features of RDNA 2, and while the PlayStation 5 will have these features, they may not be as fleshed out, at least based off of the way Mark Cerny presented it yesterday. Ray tracing will be there, of course. They didn't say anything about VRS, and so we're going to have to see just how fleshed out it ends up being, but nonetheless, it is custom RDNA 2. The memory, they're pretty much the same, 16 gigabytes, GDDR6 for both. The memory bandwidth is where there's some differences, 448 gigabytes per second for the PS5, 10 gigabytes at 560 gigabytes per second for the Xbox Series, but also they have 6 gigabytes at 336 gigabytes per second. And then obviously you have the custom SSD. Now what's interesting is that the PlayStation 5 opted for 825 gigabytes, which a lot of people are upset about, but they don't seem to understand that, as Sony explained as well as Digital Foundry, this was actually necessary because in order to keep things running smoothly based off of how customized this SSD is, they had to go with 825 gigabytes. Apparently if they went to 1 terabyte, it would mess a bunch of stuff up. I'm not technically sound enough to understand that, but that's the explanation they're giving anyway, to whereas the Xbox Series has 1 terabyte custom NVMe SSD. Now, the other area, aside from the GPU, where there's the biggest difference is with the I/O throughput. And this is where Sony put more of a emphasis, like rather than focusing on the GPU, they put more focus on the I/O throughput here, where it says the PS5's SSD will get 5.5 gigabytes per second raw, typical 8 to 9 gigabytes per second compressed, and then for the Xbox Series, 2.4 gigabytes per second raw, 4.8 gigabytes per second compressed with custom hardware decompression blocks. So, yeah, this is where you can see the biggest difference between these consoles. And the most important thing I want to acknowledge here is that, first of all, just giving my opinion on this, I'm not upset at what I'm seeing here. I mean, yeah, it's not a 13.3 tflop console, it's not an 11.6 tflop console, but I think what a lot of people will fail to tell you is that if you go back, if you watch any of these videos where I talk about this, I've always said that I don't believe that the tflop number is really going to be the be-all, end-all when it comes to what we're going to see. And that is the most important thing I can continue to stress here, that I have stressed before. It all comes down to what you're going to see practically in front of you. And that's what's going to matter most to any gamer at the end of the day. I mean, you're going to have people who, they're going to say, I'm going to buy a PS5 because I just want a PS5 and I'm excited for the games that Sony's going to have. You're going to have people who say, I want to buy the Xbox Series because it's the more powerful console and I just want the most powerful console. But most people are really looking at this and trying to determine, well, what will the differences be? And there's no doubt that there will be differences. But what exactly they will be and to what extent, we really don't know. And this is where the big, my outlook on the bigger picture here is this. What I think it's ultimately going to come down to is not only price. I mean, based off of everything we know about both of these consoles, I am fully expecting the PS5 to be priced lower than the Xbox Series, whether it's by $50 or $100. That's what I'm anticipating. I think that what people are going to be doing is they're going to have to evaluate for themselves, first of all, the price difference, and then if there is a price difference, or even if there isn't, they're going to have to look at what the difference is in games. What can the Xbox Series do that the PS5 can't do for games? What can the PS5 do for games that the Xbox Series potentially can't do? And this is where we're going to see, based off of what developers are capable of achieving with these consoles, because again, I've tried to explain, and developers will back this up, I've tried to explain that the tflop number, while it creates exciting conversation, of course, it's not the be-all, end-all, and it's not the ultimate determining factor in what you end up seeing from games. And I feel that even the base model PS4 can attest to this, where you look at some of the games today that, the way they look, especially the first-party games from Sony, the way they look running on a base model PS4, and they look incredible. And, of course, a lot of people are going to say, well, what about the third-party games? Again, this is where I don't have the answers. What I do know is that there are a lot of individuals, within the industry who have had a few things to say about, everything that Sony announced yesterday. And as you can tell, this is me right now focusing on the good. There are some bad things that Sony did yesterday that I do want to acknowledge, but just to focus on the good here, and I'm only doing this isn't damage control, okay? It's really not. I think it's a little bit unfair for people to try to convince others that because the PlayStation 5 is technically not as powerful as the Xbox Series, that means we should be less excited, that it's some kind of terrible console, that people shouldn't look forward to it. I just think that that's a little bit unfair. And I feel as though the way Sony presented it doesn't really help the situation very much. And we're going to get more into that in a second here. But there are some notable figures within the industry who had some things to say about the PlayStation 5's SSD, because as most of you know, there is seemingly some misinformation out here where a lot of people are assuming that the only benefit you're going to see with a better SSD, with all of this money and all of the resources that Sony put into this SSD, you're just going to see slightly better load times. Now, I'm not technically sound enough to be able to tell you otherwise. However, there are other people who are. One of these people is Anthony Newman. He works at Naughty Dog, and he says that the most crucial part of the Cerny presentation, in my opinion, the SSD in the PS5 and all the associated I/O hardware, is going to fundamentally change how we design video games by removing limitations we've been working around the last 2 generations. Okay? That's what Anthony Newman had to say. Randy Pitchford, he had to say that this is great stuff. I'm very excited about that I/O. In other words, the 5.5 gigabytes per second with this SSD. Then you have John Linneman from Digital Foundry, and he said the craziest thing about PS5 is the speed of the SSD. 5.5 gigabytes per second is just part of the story. There is a lot of custom silicon in there to ensure that the system isn't bottlenecked in other areas. It's really fast on paper, a lot faster than the Xbox Series X even. And so somebody actually said to him, load times really aren't going to matter to the masses. Where's Sony's big thing? And basically what he's trying to highlight is that the most people are interpreting this huge boost in the SSD as just it equates to nothing but better load times. And that's understandable. This is, again, where I think Sony may have dropped the ball a little bit in the way they presented this information. I don't think the information they presented was bad. I think the way they presented it was bad. And again, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And John Linneman responded by saying it's not about load times, it's about accessing data super fast on the fly. It can change how worlds are designed. It's a fundamental shift. And on top of that, we also have Jason Schreier, and he said, I shouldn't have to be the one saying this, but the PS5's SSD is a huge deal and could actually change the way games are designed. Meanwhile, gamers will just look at the side-by-side specs and believe that the Xbox is superior. Sony's marketing couldn't have handled this any worse. And he also went on to say that when he referenced a developer who said to him that the PlayStation 5 is the most exciting hardware in 20 years, that was a big reason for their excitement, was this SSD and the I/O throughput. Now, why am I highlighting this? Am I highlighting this just to damage control? I'm not. I'm really not. I'm highlighting this because these are individuals who would have, more knowledge on this subject than I do. And they're out here basically, listen, if I'm damage controlling, then they're damage controlling. They're just saying that a lot of people don't seem to understand how big of a deal this SSD is and why Sony opted to really put all of their resources into it. But they're also seemingly saying the same thing I am, where this is kind of down to Sony's poor marketing. And this is where we have to get into the bad of this, side of the part of this conversation, because there were a few things now that I've been removed from it. Look, I know that a lot of people are going to say to me, MBG, Sony made it crystal clear that this was intended for GDC. It was intended for developers. So you can't really expect it to be geared towards the mass market and the consumer. Here's the problem with that line of thinking, though. It doesn't matter. Just because that's what it is, just because Sony made it clear that's what it is, doesn't mean that their video isn't currently number one on trending with over 8 million views in less than 24 hours. The point is, Sony has been so quiet for so long with the PS5. The anticipation has been building so high, the expectation. And the last thing we got was a logo reveal. In between that time and Mark Cerny's presentation yesterday, their competition, and this doesn't help Sony at all, has been super aggressive, and they've been hitting all of their beats, right? Like Microsoft, I feel like I've given them credit where credit is due. They've been doing a phenomenal job with the Xbox Series and the way they've been talking about it. They've been revealing games. They've been showing the console. They've been doing, their own deep dives into their specs. They've been showing it, right? Like they've been releasing videos showing what people can expect with the Xbox Series versus the Xbox One. And the point is, they've been doing a lot of telling and a lot of showing, to where Sony, as of right now, has only been doing a lot of telling. And even though they made it clear that this was intended for GDC and it was intended for developers, that didn't stop the masses who were, at a, again, anticipation levels through the roof. That didn't stop them from expecting something more than just a literal technical deep dive that was geared towards developers. Here's a scenario I want to propose to you, that you let me know if you think this maybe could have changed the situation. Because currently, I'm not going to lie to you guys, the worst part about everything, in my opinion, look, I've always made it clear, this is just my opinion, I've made it clear that power for me is not the be-all, end-all. I had the Xbox One X, the world's most powerful console. I still ended up buying a PS4 Pro, and I still ended up being way more impressed with the PS4 Pro. Granted, yeah, there are some third-party games that certainly run and look better on the One X, but for me personally, I determined that PlayStation's where I'm sticking. Their games are amazing, and I don't have a problem playing a few games here and there that just look slightly less, have a slightly less resolution, whatever. That's not the biggest deal in the world to me. I mean, both the PS5 and the Xbox Series are going to be able to do 4K 60, most likely no problem on pretty much all games. That's just the way it is. And this is where, Microsoft may have some more bells and whistles when it comes to some better ray tracing and a few other things. And Sony may have their own bells and whistles with 3D audio, the big emphasis they're putting on the Tempest audio engine, and as well as the really fast, rapid load times, and apparently some fundamental changes that can be made with that. I'm just trying to say that for me personally, power has never been the be-all, end-all. But I understand that perception is everything, and right now Sony dropped the ball with the way they chose to present this. I did a poll on my channel, and I asked my audience about 19 hours ago at this point, are you happy with the PS5 specs? 75% of you said yes, 25% of you said no. And obviously there were a lot of people who had a lot of things to say, but the majority of people were saying that, look, while the presentation wasn't the best in the world, people are excited because they are expecting that Sony is still going to have those big reveals. And this is where, one other thing I have to mention that Sony, I think, really dropped the ball on, and something I noticed a lot of you mentioned, is you were really disappointed that Sony didn't seemingly reveal or talk about full backwards compatibility. And I'm not going to lie to you guys right now. The chances that we're going to see PS3 and PS2 and PS1 backwards compatibility, I don't think it's going to happen. And I just have to be real here when I say this, because if there was ever a time where Sony was going to talk about it, it would have been yesterday during that technical deep dive presentation. Now, what's also disappointing is apparently Sony, they're not having trouble with PS4 backwards compatibility, but they're basically letting us know that with the way they're choosing to do backwards compatibility, they took the top 100 PS4 games and they got them working, and now they're going to continue to bring more and more and more games. I believe in their blog post they said that there's over 4,000 PS4 games, and they're going to work diligently to bring as many of them as possible, as quickly as possible, over so that they work no problem. I would assume that if they are working on this as diligently as they make it seem, that by the time the PS5 launches, most PS4 games will be playable. Again, this is where their competition has a leg up on them. There's no way around it. Microsoft has made it clear every single generation of Xbox game is playable day one on the Xbox Series. That is a huge leg up that they have. And the fact that Sony has to basically say, well, we have to kind of like, test every single game out before we do it. Okay, that's good, because I'm sure in the end it's going to result in pretty much all 4,000 games working, or 99% of PS4 games working, but still not a good look compared to your competition. Just had to bring that up here because, again, I have to call it like it is. I have to be real here and honest with my opinions. You have fans that are over here not only expecting full-blown PS4 backwards compatibility, but full-blown compatibility with every single generation of PlayStation, and Sony's over here basically, having to let people down, saying, well, we're still working on PS4 backwards compatibility. There's no doubt that that is not a good thing, but putting that aside, because it is what it is, right? Like, we can't change that. That's just how it is. Hopefully in the future Sony can do something more about that. I doubt it, but we just, we have to take it for what it is. I really think that Sony messed up their chance here, because while there are a lot of people who do understand this was intended for developers, and as you can see here, developers are certainly expressing their excitement for the PS5, it doesn't matter. I said earlier in this video I wanted to present a scenario to you that I think would have maybe completely changed this conversation entirely, and this is the scenario. Imagine that yesterday, or the day before yesterday, right? The day before Sony decided to do this deep dive, they revealed the PlayStation 5 in a trailer. An awesome 2-minute trailer, kind of similar to what Microsoft did, where they show the console, they hype it up, they tease some games alongside of it, and it looks awesome. They show the controller, they give the basic specs, they emphasize on just how fast this console is going to be, and all this stuff, and then after that they actually reveal a new game alongside of it. I think if they would have done that, okay, and then the next day did this deep dive presentation, the conversation would be totally different right now. Totally different. It wouldn't matter so much that the PS5 is less powerful. It wouldn't, like, again, even if they didn't want to reveal a new game with the PS5 trailer, maybe they could have at least showed Spider-Man, right? They could have shown that comparison. Spider-Man running on the PS5 versus running on the PS4 Pro, just to show you, practically speaking, show the gamer the differences they're going to see. Because this is just the brutal truth of the matter, guys. Most gamers who were tuning in to that presentation yesterday didn't care about what Mark Cerny had to say. That's just the brutal truth of the matter. They didn't care. They tuned in because they were expecting to be, shown something to get really excited about. They were expecting a new game. They were expecting to see the console at the very least. They didn't get any of that. And I guess my big question to Sony right now is, who thought this was a good idea? I really have to ask this because, again, it's better than nothing, but at the same time, everything, like, Sony put themselves in a not so great position right now. And just like it was said here, the marketing couldn't have been any worse. And so I'm not trying to be overly negative here, but I have to call a spade here. And while I am still very excited for the PS5, and I actually think these specs sound pretty good, and I have a feeling that both of these consoles are going to be pretty close to one another, there will certainly be differences, but and I think one of those differences will be price. I do think that it's still very exciting, and I think every gamer has a reason to be excited about either console. But there's no doubt that Sony dropped the ball yesterday, and they're gonna have to they're gonna have to learn from this, because I promise you this: there's no way that they are not feeling the heat right now. They are certainly feeling the heat, and I hope that what they're realizing is, okay, the time for talk is over. We've been telling it, and we've been telling it. Now you got to show it. And all I will say is that the next time Sony talks about the PS5, they better bring it. They better bring it because their competition has been bringing it. That's just the truth, man. Microsoft has been aggressive, and I don't think that's going to stop. Like, if Sony's waiting for Microsoft to become less aggressive throughout the year, I don't think that's going to happen. So the next time Sony talks about the PS5, bring it. Bring the stuff that you know people are waiting for. And when they do that, I think this conversation will be much different, and I think that we're going to see a really interesting back and forth. Because right now, Sony dropped the ball, and that's just the truth of the matter. Again, I don't think there's any reason to not be excited about PlayStation 5. I mean, there are some people who are being really extra about this, as if Sony just like ruined their life, kind of like when Horizon Zero Dawn was announced for PC. I don't know what to tell those people. Like, don't buy a PS5, I guess. Go buy something else. I really don't know what to say. But for me, I'm still excited for the PS5, and I think that what Microsoft is doing with the Xbox Series is great, and I think gamers have a lot to look forward to. But there's no doubt in my mind that Sony, listen, the next time you talk about the PS5, you better be ready to show it, because you're getting I will admit, we're giving you a little bit of a pass right now, but you still have some time. Show it. And that's where I'm going to end the video, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. Again, I know it was long, but I had a lot to say here. So let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. I will be interested to see what you guys have to say. Leave the video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload. And feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.